detail later on. Now, thankfully it did go extinct, or otherwise Jaws would be really messed up. Tracing our ancestry, from bacteria to modern man. Have you ever wondered what human beings were like billions of years ago? Well, I'll tell you about that during this presentation. In its last 4.6 billion years, humanity has changed from simple atoms to complex multicellular life forms. In the last 3.6 billion years, we were simple cells, prokaryotes. In the last 3.4 billion years, we were simply cyanobacteria photosynthesizing, like the euglena you all learn in science class. And in the last 2 billion years, we became complex cells, eukaryotes, like the ones that make up living organisms. And in the last 1 billion years, we finally evolved into multicellular life forms. In the last 600 million years, we finally evolved into complex, simple animals. So I'll start off with the Paleozoic era, 542 to 250 million years ago. The Paleozoic era was the longest and most diverse of all the 3 eras that we will cover. The Paleozoic era was the start of life itself, from the Cambrian period to the Permian mass extinction. So let us get on with it. The Cambrian period, also known as the Cambrian explosion. The Cambrian explosion started off from a relative of the sponge, a sponge-like organism that soon developed somehow from possibly viral infections and transferring DNA to many complex life forms. For example, our ancestors, like Pikaia. Pikaia was a small worm-like creature with slug eyes, if you can see. And this animal was indeed our ancestor. At the other end of the food chain was a strange creature called Anomalocaris. Anomalocaris was the top predator of the Cambrian period. It had massive jaws which it used to grab prey and swallow it. The Ordovician period, 510 million years ago. The Ordovician period resulted from the Cambrian period, a massive extinction occurring during that era. It gave rise to the new top predators, the cephalopods, such as the orthocones. Orthocones such as Camaraoceras were the biggest animals ever existing in the Paleozoic era, next to Dunkleosteus. The Camaraoceras had several tentacles, 12 or 8. It used these to snap up its favorite prey, eurypterids and horseshoe crabs. Eurypterids were another creature. They were actually gigantic sea scorpions with huge arms that they would use to, quote, hug their prey and kill its spirit. And using their chelicerae, they would grab out massive mouthfuls and swallow it. Agirocassis, one of my favorite animals throughout this slide, is a large arthropod-like animal with baleen-like filters that it used to swallow different types of tiny microorganisms. The Silurian period, 430 million years ago. The eurypterids were still around during this time period, and most of them did not have the similar tail-like fluke that we see in the Ordovician period evolution. Instead, they had a large stinger, similar to scorpions of today. We can also see larger eurypterids, like, as we can see here, Pteridocus, a massive sea scorpion, attacking a Orthoceras. Its relative, the Pterygotus, can be seen here attacking a Brontoscorpio, one of the first animals to ever make the transition onto land. The Devonian period, age of the fish. Our ancestors, and yes, you can actually trace your ancestry back to giant salamander-like organisms. These creatures, like Ichthyostega and Canthostega, were some of the top predators or prey of the animal kingdom during this time. But the top predators were truly the sea scorpions and the fish. The sea scorpions were in their prime during this wonderful era, such as Jackalopterus. Jackalopterus was the biggest arthropod that we have ever known. It had massive pincers that it used to grab prey and swallow it. This creature was covered in armor plating and tough denticles to shield it from attackers. One of its predators was a large shark called Stethacanthes. Stethacanthes had a similar defense mechanism from predators such as Dunkleosteus that to a porcupines. If you can see there, it had large denticles, I don't know if you can see, on its fin and its head, and no, that is not a fairy tale animal. The top predator of the time period was Dunkleosteus. Dunkleosteus was from a family of placoderms. Placoderms have armor plating all over their heads and in some species even all over their bodies. These animals were massive in size. Dunkleosteus was 30 feet in length, the size of a killer whale, and actually it was toothless. This creature only had bony denticles as teeth, well, not really teeth, that it used, think of like a scissor, that it used to cut rays and small sharks. The Carboniferous period, age of the giant creepy crawlies. This was an age of great diversity of arthropods and amphibians. So who here is afraid of spiders? Okay, then I don't think you'd like to know that there was a massive spider called Mesothele during the Carboniferous period, twice the size of any tarantula, and this animal had enough venom to kill a horse. It was the top predator on land, and it possibly hunted our ancestors, Petrolacosaurus and Holonomimus. Yes, you can actually trace your ancestry back to small gecko-like reptiles. These animals possibly preyed on the smaller arthropods of the time period. And as you can see, a Petrolacosaurus is devouring a small fly-like organism. Now, the herbivores of the time period were massive, such as Arthropleura. Arthropleura was a huge 13-foot millipede, and it did not use its massive pincers to kill animals. It in fact used them to crop rotting vegetation. The top predators of the swamps were, of course, the amphibians, like Eodrynus and Gerophytes. Eodrynus and Gerophytes had hunting methods similar to that of crocodiles. These creatures would swim around in the Carboniferous swamps and jump up, catching insects like the Meganeura, another predator of the time period, and coming back in without having any harm. The Permian period, age of mammal-like reptiles. This was a true diverse era, and it was nothing like how we used to know it. One species has changed a lot through what we have known. I think you can see there Dimetrodon giganomes, and it is nothing like we used to know it. The previous Dimetrodon that we used to know had a lizard-like stance, was more reptilian, and was very often confused with a dinosaur. Actually, you'd be more correct to label Dimetrodon a mammal than a reptile. It had massive spines coming out of its back, and that is actually a hump, not a sail. It now had a crocodilian or mammalian-like stance and a rat-like tail. Its prey sources were likely fish in its swamp-like habitat, so walking with monsters was very, very incorrect in its idea that it was actually living in a desert. Edaphosaurus was one of its main land food sources. This animal was similar to what we now know, but it had smooth skin instead of reptilian skin. These animals soon died out as the swamps that they lived in became extinct. Now, this left room for other herbivores and predators, such as the massive theraspids, like the Gorgonopsid and the Lacanops. These hunted mammal-like reptiles like Lystrosaurus and Mostrops. They also hunted ancestors of turtles, such as Scutosaurus. Permian mass extinction, also known as the Great Dying Event. And out of the disaster, a new dinosaur world was born. So how exactly did the Permian mass extinction occur? It actually occurred through an area of the Siberian traps in the supercontinent of Pangaea that had formed. This actually exploded through volcanism and released dust into the air, blotting out the sunlight, killing off the algae, which the cyanobacteria could then feed off and release poisonous gases into the atmosphere. This then caused the downfall of the mammal-like reptiles and the beginning of the archosaurs. It, in total, wiped out 95% of all living organisms. Our ancestors were nearly wiped out through this cataclysmic event, and it left the new road to the age of the reptiles. The Mesozoic era, our next era. So the Mesozoic era saw the rise and fall of the dinosaurs and several other creatures. For example, the archosaurs and the large sea serpents. Pangaea, all the land. the supercontinent that was present during the Permian era and was beginning to break up during the Triassic era. It is consisted of Eurasia, America, South America, India, and Africa, and Australia, and Antarctica. Now, the supercontinent of Pangaea was huge in size, the largest continent that has ever appeared in our history. Soon the supercontinent of Pangaea would break apart during what is known as the camp eruptions and would result in yet another mass extinction. The dawn of the dinosaurs, the Triassic period, 230 million years ago. This was a time when the archosaurs were the main predators of the landscape. Here you can see a Postosuchus attacking a Coelophysis. The Coelophysis was the first dinosaur ever discovered in the Triassic period. It had relatives that were similar like other dinosaurs, such as perhaps the early raptors, many raptoran dinosaurs. We have other creatures too, like Longosquama. Longosquama was a lizard-like animal, and it had a strange set of large feathers protruding out of its back. It is not really known what these feathers were used for, but to predators it seemed that it was like a walking fruit salad. Other creatures include the Atopundentatus. The Atopundentatus was a sea-like reptile that roamed the oceans and was a semi-aquatic animal. It had a strange set of jaws. If you can see, the jaws had a slit into the snout where teeth were fused in. It used to run into krill shoals and scoop out the krill. It is a very strange animal indeed and is not a fairy unicorn. The beginning of the Jurassic. The land belonged to the dinosaurs. So how did the beginning of the Jurassic occur? Well, the Pangaea started to break apart. It resulted in the camp eruptions. The camp eruptions were a huge set of eruptions that occurred during the southern area of Pangaea. This eruption split off one part of Pangaea and gave rise to the dinosaurs. How did the dinosaurs survive? They actually stood upright so they were not restricted by carrier's constraint. Carrier's constraint is something that you find in reptiles and other animals. When they actually move, one lung gets stretched and the other one gets squashed. So these creatures find it very difficult to breathe while moving. This caused their downfall. The top predator of the time period was Dilophosaurus. Dilophosaurus was a large animal the size of a horse. Jurassic Park got it very incorrect. Again, what they said about Dilophosaurus was it was a tiny dog-like animal that only had a frill and venomous bite. It actually had none of these qualities and was actually possibly covered in feathers and was the size of a horse. The late Jurassic, the land of the dinosaurs. In the late Jurassic, there had finally been a complex food web established between the predators and the prey. First, we have the prey sources, for example, the Ophthalmiosaurus and the Stegosaurus and the massive sauropods. Then we have the large Allosaurus, or smaller predators like Ornitholestes and Ceratosaurus. Then we have even bigger predators like Torvosaurus and Saurophaganax. The late Jurassic soon ended with a bang with another cataclysmic mass extinction of climate change, wiping off several species. The early to mid-Cretaceous, the heyday of the dinosaurs begins. Now, I'd like to dedicate this slide to a specific species which I think it's personally my favorite, the Spinosaurids. So I will talk to you about the Spinosaurids throughout this slide. So starting off with the like T-Rex. It is definitely your favorite dinosaur. So, did you actually know T-Rex was covered in feathers and looked like a giant turkey? In fact, it was mostly a scavenger. Tyrannosaurus Rex, I can give you a definition of it. Tyrannosaurus Rex can be a giant dumpster truck walking around a restaurant, eating your leftovers, and accidentally sometimes eating a child or two. That is my definition of it. The late Cretaceous was also a great momentous time for the pterosaurs. If you can see there, one of the aerial predators was Quetzalcoatlus. Now, there are some misconceptions about pterosaurs, following that it could carry people off and eat them. Actually, pterosaur bones were paper thin. They couldn't lift a pig. The maximum weight that they could lift was about 3 kilograms, not much more. They possibly scavenged or ate fish in their environment. The Mesozoic sea monsters. There have been a lot of misconceptions about the biggest predator. That is not actually Megalodon. That role belongs to Shoniosaurus, a strange marine reptile that was actually the size of a whale, 70 feet long. This massive predator swam the Triassic oceans and ate massive squid and plesiosaurs. Once the Jurassic era had finished, it left room for the top predators, the mosasaurs. This ranged from the Mosasaurus, the top predator, and Tylosaurus. Now, as you can see in the picture, we have a Mosasaurus, a particularly large one, attacking a medium-sized Tylosaur over territory. In the Cretaceous, it was actually called Hell's Aquarium by a very famous man called Nigel Marven. Hell's Aquarium consisted of some of the deadliest creatures that the world has ever known, like Xiphactinus, a massive 20-foot fish that would just swallow anything it could catch, and then dying of eating too much. So the end of the dinosaurs, 65 million years ago. The Cretaceous period ended with a bang. In the Cretaceous period, a huge asteroid 6 miles wide slammed at 100,000 miles per hour into the Yucatan Peninsula, ending the dinosaurs. But that wasn't the only contributing factor to their downfall. In India, a large volcanic activity had occurred that spewed massive amounts of dust and ash into the air, sickening the planet. This clearly overwhelmed the dinosaurs and wiped them off. The age of birds and reptiles had ended, and the age of mammals was about to begin. The Cenozoic era. The Cenozoic era was the prime era, and in fact, we are still in the Cenozoic era. Now, I'll just talk about the 2 periods that are most famous in this wonderful era. The Tertiary period, age of the terror birds and several other creatures. Mammals weren't first to rise. Actually, first were the reptiles and the birds. The reptiles included Titanoboa, a massive 42-foot-long snake that could swallow a human being without showing a neck bulge. This animal could possibly be the length of a school bus, and however, it was 1.5 tons, 2 feet wide, so it could probably not be able to fit through your front door. Another creature was the terror bird. These are massive 9-foot killers that were related to ducks. The terror birds actually hunted early horses, and think about that, a bird eating a horse. Now, the terror birds were the top predators at the time, but climate change soon wiped them out, leaving room for bigger mammalian predators, like Hyaenodon and Entelodont. These animals were the top predators of the time, and were the best hunters of the landscape. In the ocean, we have another top predator, Megalodon. Megalodon, the monster shark is so called, is only 50 feet, not 70 feet. This animal was the top predator, however, of its ocean time period. It went extinct during several factors, climate change and that its prey sources were diminishing and becoming predators of themselves, and becoming predators, like Leviathan Malevoli. The Quaternary period. I'd actually like to dedicate this slide more to the human beings than to the animals. So the seeds of humanity were implanted in Australopithecus, a ape-like animal that could stand upright. Then it soon developed into Homo habilis and then into Homo erectus. Homo erectus soon split off into 2 different groups, the Neanderthals and the Homo sapiens. Climate change and competition from the Homo sapiens eventually wiped out the Neanderthals. It then came to modern man, in this case, you and me. Thank you for joining me on this wonderful journey into the fascinating world of prehistoric life. I shall be glad to take any audience's queries.